Hello? Oh, hey Jay. So, tell me what she looks like. Oh, blonde.
Scarlett, story freed from the scaffolding of being anyone's target, opens instead on the particular and unglamorous texture of a life in transition. 4 years into a New York City existence that has not delivered whatever she imagined it would when she arrived, and the loss of her job as a textbook editor functions less as a plot-inciting incident than as a genuine crisis of identity, because for many people, and especially for people whose creative ambitions remain unrealized, a job title, even one that feels like a compromise, provides a scaffolding of purpose and daily structure that masks a deeper uncertainty about who they actually are and what they are actually building toward. And when that scaffolding disappears, what's left is often not simply the practical problem of finding new income, but the more unsettling confrontation with everything the job had been quietly holding at bay. The question of whether the writing she has always wanted to pursue is a real vocation or simply a comforting fantasy, whether her isolation in the city has been a temporary condition or the actual shape of her life, whether the version of herself she imagined becoming when she first arrived 4 years ago bears any resemblance to the person she has actually become. This kind of unmooring, arriving precisely when external structure falls away, deserves careful attention because it mirrors an experience many queer women recognize intimately. The way identity so often gets built provisionally around whatever role or relationship is currently available. A job, a friend group, a version of femininity or partnership that feels safe or expected, and how a sudden disruption to that provisional structure can be simultaneously terrifying and clarifying, forcing a more honest reckoning with questions that daily busyness had allowed to remain comfortably unexamined. And Scarlett's position, alone in a massive city, unemployed, uncertain, represents exactly this kind of forced reckoning, an involuntary pause that nonetheless creates the conditions for real self-discovery if she is willing and able to sit with the discomfort rather than rush to fill it. Her aspiration to write, mentioned almost tentatively, as though she herself isn't entirely sure she believes in it, deserves to be read as more than a career ambition, because creative work for many isolated people functions as a private language for processing exactly the kind of interior complexity that daily life, especially a solitary daily life without many close relationships to confide in, offers few other outlets for expressing. And the fact that Scarlett has aspirations to write, despite currently having no professional foothold in that world, suggests a persistent, quiet insistence within her that her interior life deserves to be given shape and voice, even when the external world has offered her little encouragement or validation to pursue that instinct. And this quiet insistence, this refusal to let practical setbacks fully extinguish a creative or expressive impulse, is itself a meaningful form of self-respect worth honoring narratively. The decision to keep believing in your own potential even when your circumstances give you every reason to abandon that belief. The isolation Scarlett experiences in New York deserves particular attention as well, because there is a specific and underexamined loneliness that comes from living in one of the most densely populated cities in the world, while still feeling profoundly unseen, surrounded by millions of people, and yet unable to locate the handful of genuine connections that would make that density feel like community, rather than simply crowding. And this particular flavor of urban loneliness resonates powerfully for queer women who may have moved to a city specifically seeking a more accepting, more populous queer community than their hometown offered, only to discover that proximity to other queer people does not automatically translate into belonging. That community still has to be built deliberately, person by person, through vulnerability and consistency and time, and that a city's promise of anonymity and possibility can just as easily curdle into a prolonged, disorienting solitude if a person doesn't find her specific people within it. What would make a story centered honestly on Scarlett valuable, rather than merely sympathetic, is if it took seriously the actual work of rebuilding a sense of self after this kind of rupture, not through the arrival of a romantic rescuer, but through Scarlett's own gradual, unglamorous process of reconnecting with people and communities on her own initiative, finding a writing group, reconnecting with an old friend, discovering a queer social space in the city she had somehow never previously found her way into, taking a class, volunteering, any of the ordinary, patient methods by which isolated people slowly rebuild social and creative infrastructure for themselves, because a narrative that allows Scarlett this kind of self-directed rebuilding offers something genuinely more valuable to audiences than a story in which someone else's intervention resolves her crisis for her, modeling instead the harder, truer process by which most people actually recover their footing after a significant life disruption. through their own accumulated small efforts rather than a single transformative encounter. If romance eventually enters Scarlett's story, and there's no reason it couldn't, the version worth telling would have that romance emerge organically from this rebuilt life. Someone she meets through the writing group she found on her own. A woman in her queer community she gets to know slowly over shared meals and honest conversation. A connection built on both parties having full, accurate information about who the other person is from the very first meeting, because a Scarlett who has done the work of reconstructing her own sense of self and community is a Scarlett capable of entering a new relationship from a position of genuine strength and clarity rather than desperate vulnerability. And this distinction matters enormously for what kind of relationship she would then be capable of building. One rooted in mutual recognition between two people who each arrive with their own full lives and stability, rather than one in which loneliness and need do the work that authentic desire and compatibility should be doing instead. There's real value, too, in imagining Scarlett's writing itself as a site of self-discovery running parallel to her social rebuilding. The possibility that in finally sitting down to write honestly, perhaps for the first time without a job structure to hide behind, she encounters something true about her own desires and identity on the page before she encounters it in her actual life. Because creative work often functions this way, allowing a person to test out and explore feelings or possibilities in the relatively safe container of fiction before she's ready to claim them directly. And a Scarlett who discovers, through her own writing, some clarity about wanting a woman rather than the men she may have previously dated, would be enacting a genuinely common and valuable pattern of queer self-recognition, one in which art functions not as a disguise for feeling, but as the very method by which feeling first becomes legible to the person having it. What ultimately makes this version of Scarlett's story worth telling is its insistence that her value and her eventual capacity for love do not depend on being discovered, scouted, or rescued by anyone else, but rather on her own patient, sometimes difficult work of rebuilding a self and a life worth living. Community found through her own initiative, creative ambition pursued despite uncertainty, and any eventual romantic connection arriving only once she has already done the harder and more important work of no longer needing that connection to complete her. Because a woman who enters love from a place of wholeness rather than desperate need is a woman capable of recognizing genuine compatibility and mutual respect, rather than mistaking rescue or attention for real intimacy. And this is precisely the kind of foundation queer women deserve to see modeled in the stories written for them. Self-possession and community built first. Love arriving after as an addition to an already full life, rather than a substitute for the connection and purpose she was capable of building for herself all along.